what's your BHAG, your big hairy audacious goal for season 2?
I never heard BHAG. Is that, are you patenting that?
No, unfortunately, I wish I could, but yeah, no, feel free to use it though. Guys, there are very few podcasts that I actually listen to just on repeat, from one episode to the other. Can't wait to get to the next one. But I got to tell you, I am hooked on the Midnight Library of Baseball. Even if you are not a baseball fan, my next guest, Ben Orlando, he is the creator of this amazing podcast. He knows how to spin a story. He knows how to suck you in and keep you in wanting to learn more. His podcast was introduced to me by Brian Benson. You might remember Brian, TEDx speaker, actor, motivational speaker, just an amazing all around guy that has become a good friend. Well, I saw Brian a few months back in Arizona when I went out and had lunch with him. And he told me about Ben, told me about an interview that they had done together, and he shared it with me, and I was hooked. Just Ben's love of the game, Ben's knowledge of the history of baseball. Well, it fascinated me in a big, big way. It also helped me get to know Brian even a little bit more and some of the things that he did as a youth to go and get track down, baseball cards and get autographs of these major players, and just how important it is in terms of how he evolved the stories in his own thinking and kind of how that informs his work today. I became an instant fan of this podcast. I got to tell you, season 1 has history of baseball that none of us probably have ever taken the time to get to know. It's incredible. I highly, highly recommend it. Season 2, he dives into Field of Dreams and how that was actually adapted from W.P. Kinsella's book about Shoeless Joe Jackson. It's fascinating. And I know many of us know this film, but I bet you don't know the backstories. I bet you don't know how it came about. I bet you don't know just what an absolute impact it's had on so many lives. I could tell you stories for days about how that movie has impacted me, how I had hoped to use it as a leverage point to deepen my relationship with my own father. It didn't quite work out the way that I had hoped. But that movie, every time it's on, I just stop. I will watch it till the end, and I will pretty much cry every single time. Ben does an amazing job uncovering these little threads of knowledge and information, this historical fact, not only about the game, the movie, the books, just about the passion behind the history of baseball. And I don't consider myself a baseball aficionado. I've always been a fan, but I am not like one of those crazy fans. I have always been a Cubs fan, which means I'm used to losing. But I am so down the rabbit hole, thanks to Ben, on some of these stories, not just because of the episodes, but because there's a genuine interest in learning from those that came before us, how they built their careers, what they did, some of the heartaches and some of the challenges that they had to overcome. It's like spurned so much creativity for me. So, but I digress, which I tend to do. I am so absolutely honored that Ben made time to come in. Ben is a therapist, he's an author, he is an amazing podcast host. I can only hope someday to get as good as he is at conducting an interview and interlacing a show like he does. It is an absolute honor to have him on the Ripple Effect podcast. So let's dive in and get to know Ben Orlando and learn more about the Midnight Library of Baseball. Ben, thank you so much for joining the Ripple Effect podcast. I cannot begin to tell you how excited I am to have this interview. I was up this morning at about 3:30 just with excitement, and that's no lie. I was listening to your podcast as I was riding my bike today, and I have been in deep, deep, deep going through it. In fact, I think I'm on the second replay of season 2, just where you're at up to this point with season 2. I love it. And I've gone through season 1 and have been recommending it to all of my friends. So I'm super excited to have you here. So thank you for joining. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I hope you have bike trails where you can listen to the podcast without having to pay attention to the road.
I, I'm lucky because we've got this long stretch of road not far from my house that as long as I stay on the sidewalk, I don't have to worry about anybody
Ah,
looking at their phone for those early morning drives. I'm
uh-huh.
pretty good. And it is a great way to unwind. I normally am at the gym every day, but they don't open till 5. And today I think it was just the excitement for this interview. So I got up and I'm like, I went and got on the bike and, put you in my ears and off I went. So it turned out all right.
Well, I mean, that's great that it's like you're listening to it when you're exercising and trying to wake up. Part of the podcast intention is so that people can fall asleep, and just
Yeah, I'm trying to do it. I'm trying to do it backwards, but I have listened to
yeah,
the episodes as kind of a great way to unwind at night because you have such a calm, chill vibe to the show. I just absolutely love it. But personally, I can listen to it at any point during the day.
okay. Well, I mean that was one of the motivations. So there are several motivations to doing this, and I've done several podcasts over the years. Like right in the beginning, like I was pretty big into podcasts. Like that was probably 2010. Like I did a history podcast, and then had that going for a while. It was called History Repeating Itself, where I would interview professors, experts, and uh, it's still similar. This is baseball focused, but it's why haven't people seen this? Why haven't people looked at this angle or this perspective? Like I'm really still interested in that. Um, but my wife and we listen to podcasts sometimes at night, and we're just wanting to wind down and go to sleep, and then all of a sudden, bang! Right there's a loud noise, or there's a commercial that comes
Yeah.
on, and like, well, why did you do that? So, I wanted to have a podcast that is calming, but also still includes the unknown, the different perspectives, things people haven't looked at or considered, and putting that together.
I love that. It was almost as if you knew what my first question was because I specifically uh, enjoy when you say in the intro, no loud music, no jarring sounds. And I was going to ask you why, but I think you just answered it. I think
Yeah.
that's perfect. I love that. And I think that's such a great way to look at how to make that, sort of the setup for the show because everything is really really calming and very you can tell you put a lot of intention in how you break up the show and the fact that I'm gonna have to go find your other podcasts because I love how you break the show up in terms of your interview style, the approach that you take, how you bring just a unique, I think, to a degree, a very unique format to the subject, whatever that might be for that particular episode. So, is that something that you did previously with your other podcasts as well, or how did that style kind of adapt?
Yeah, I did. So in History Repeating Itself, it was, I think, modeled off of shows like Freakonomics, or This American Life from NPR, where there is the narrative, but
Yep.
also the interview, and it's I really like that. I didn't do it for season one of Midnight Library Baseball as much, but when I'm doing it for the Field of Dreams season, it's I really like it, and it's really fun, and it's also really time consuming because
I was
it's
going to
like,
say, yeah.
James Earl Jones was cast in Field of Dreams because of a lawsuit. The original reclusive writer in the novel Shoeless Joe was J.D. Salinger, author of The Catcher in the Rye.
it's interviewing people and then getting the information, putting it together, synthesizing that with other things that I want to say, and then editing it together. And if there's sound now and like lighter music background, putting that together. But I like bringing those pieces together. I like listening to that kind of podcast. So
Me too.
that's what I like doing as well, and it's very fulfilling just to put the pieces together. It's fun, and I
Yeah.
can just sit back and lose myself in that process, whatever it is, because there's so many different parts of it. There's the thinking up the episodes, there's the interviewing people, which is really has really been fulfilling. And the editing, the written part, and then the audio part, which takes time as well. So there are all these extra components because I'm a writer. And one of the things that really spurred this project, I have a book in the publication process right now about a female knuckleball pitcher who is making her way, and it's the story of her and this washed out minor league player who sees her and like, you're really good, like, why aren't people noticing this?
Yeah.
And so it's that story of making it to the big leagues, because that's another question for me. Why hasn't this happened? Why hasn't there been a female knuckleball player and the knuckleball in general? And to me, like, you talk about the ripple effect. It's in this story, I just see this conversation and getting people to talk about this, because that's one thing I find so interesting. All of these questions, all of these things, like, why didn't that happen? Why wasn't that a thing? I don't know if one of my episodes I talk about the earmuffs. The earmuffs that go around your back of your head, and it's like it took years and years for somebody to think about that, and it seems so obvious, but nobody did.
Well, and I just re-listened to the episode where you were talking about the batting helmets and how there was like this resistance to it because the masculinity impact. And then it became a standard because you had someone actually, died because of being hit in the head with a ball, which it was surprising to hear your statistic that there haven't been more of that, right? Over the course of, decades of time that the game was happening where there were no real protective gear.
Yeah. And it took decades after that fatality. I think it was 1920, and it wasn't until really the 60s and 70s that the major league said, you have to wear a helmet.
Yep.
And they do this weird thing in the major leagues where they have the grandfather clause when they implement a rule where anybody who was playing when they make the rule can choose to ignore it. And so I can't remember the name of the guy, but it was in the 70s or late 70s where he chose to go without a helmet to the end of his career.
I don't remember the player, but that stood out to me. Like, I think you said he retired in 79, and he was the last holdout that would not wear a protective helmet.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned, I think along that same lines, how back in the early days of baseball, right, there was the option for them to, the pitching, that there was the ability for them to do something specific with the pitches, and they were grandfathered in as to how they could do that at the time, right?
Yeah. Well, that was the spitball.
Yeah, the spitball. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Or scuffing it, right? And they could do anything to change up the trajectory.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know about like if the scuffing was included or they were turning a blind eye to that. But the spitball specifically, they had more than a dozen pitchers who were using it, and they said that was
their thing. That's how
that was their bread and butter.
Yeah.
And so they kept doing it, and it's like, okay, I think with all that's happening right now and this interview, I'm a little anxious, and so everything, the memory is not coming.
No worries.
So can't think of all the names, but Ray, who was hit and killed, but
Chapman, right?
Ray Chapman. Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. His, that wasn't enough. It's like, I feel like we're a reactive society, at least in the U.S., and it takes something like that to make change. But even with that, these pitchers were still allowed to throw the spitball. Helmets still were not a thing. And I in my first episode, I talk about Lou Gehrig, Lou Gehrig's disease, and was it actually either just from or a major result of getting hit in the head so much. And he didn't wear a helmet. It was before those days. It's incredible to think he just got hit in the head so much and never stopped, and that contributed to him dying before the age of 40. So there are so many of these questions and why did they do that? And I think it's still relevant because we're still in that phase as humans. Why do we still do so many things that are harmful, right?
I loved how you drew the comparison between Lou Gehrig and Cal Ripken, right? And how Cal actually the difference in generation, right? Lou Gehrig, would be injured, broken fingers, broken bones. He'd go out and play the next day. Get hit in the head, he would get up, and come play tomorrow, right? And but nobody was really looking after his welfare, right? His health and safety in comparison to Cal, who basically came up in a generation where all of a sudden, now you have team doctors and you have trainers and you have people that are caring for the players, and how that likely contributed to the fact that, Cal could play as long as he ultimately did. But I thought it was just when I mentioned in your intro, right, just how you touch on certain things that you like you never would have considered or ever thought about. It's kind of like, oh, there was that fact about Lou Gehrig about how many games he played for, 14 seasons or whatever the time period was. And you hear it and that's kind of like, oh, that's interesting. But there's the story behind the story that I really loved. And I think how you brought that out and really how you illustrated how massive of undertaking that was for him, how just monumental it was because he didn't have anybody that was caring for him or looking out for him over that period of time. And like you said, how those injuries, I'm sure, had a cumulative effect in terms of how he ultimately had, the health demise.
Yeah, and to go along with what you said, it's interesting to think about, and I hypothesize in the episode about playing next to the manliest of men, Babe Ruth. It's like on the planet at that time there wasn't a more manly man who exemplified that on and off the field. Like, how do you measure up? And maybe for Lou Gehrig, the one way that he could do that was this streak. And you think at the time, players are playing through everything, they're not stopping. But even at the time, he quickly surpassed the previous uh, games played streak and then just blew it out of the water. So,
Yeah.
I imagine players at the time were looking at him like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Why are you just putting yourself out there so much? And it's interesting to think about.
Well, and you kind of touch on this, right? I think part of that also comes from his upbringing. I committed to be part of this team. I committed to play the game, and I show up and do the work that I'm asked to do. Generationally, that's such a weird concept for guys that are kind of in our generation, where you're like, well, wait a sec, why would you do that? But that's really how he was raised, and I think a big part of that. I wonder. I would love, you think about conversations you'd love to have with people that have passed, but I'd love to ask him if he knew at the time he was doing something significant, or if he just thought he was doing his job.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a therapist, a psychotherapist,
Yeah.
and I like what you just said brought up like forensic psychology. It's like mining the data, and a little bit I feel like that's what I'm doing. But
Yeah.
like to really get it, like that would be cool, really cool to get into like a historical forensic psychologist, looking at these people and really digging into the archives and the information available to see what was your motivation in all these, you know, uh, amazing, events and feats that they performed.
Yeah, he especially, like you said, coming up at the time where you had Babe Ruth, who is this larger in life character in every way, right? Not just on the field, but he lived life to such extremes outside of the game. The game afforded him a lot of privileges, and he would, at the time would have been the highest paid player, the equivalent of, today's players would, he would have just been at the top of the list. But he lived to extremes. I mean, showing up to games where he was hungover or drinking in the dugout or smoking before he goes up to at bats. I mean, you think of these things as like, wow, this is like, it seems so foreign, but at a time where you had this larger than life, almost cartoon kind of character with Babe Ruth, how Lou, was just kind of steady Eddie, right? He
Yeah.
was the guy that just showed up and did what he needed to do, and he wasn't necessarily looking for any type of fanfare relative to it, but it was like a lesson in polar opposites. And I would be curious about how the manager at the time, I'm sure they had several during that period, but how do you manage to those extremes, right? You've got, plain vanilla, and then you got like, crazy raspberry fudge or something on the other side. So,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
hadn't thought of that. Your podcast made me think of those things. Yeah, these are like all these little entrails that I started going down, contemplating. Whereas what I appreciate about your storytelling, and you are a gifted storyteller,
Thank you.
is it opens up other areas of, well, what about this, or what about that, or have you thought about this? And I love that piece.
Well, thank you. And you saying that, one of the things when I'm interviewing the people integral to the Field of Dreams and making a Field of Dreams, one thing we talk about is uh, like playing catch and
Hmm.
taking compliments. And so I'm aware of that. Like when you say something like that, it's like, okay, I'm really trying to take that in and really shrug off this, nah, and it's amazing how shrugging off a compliment, what it does to the other person,
Yeah.
because we've all been on both sides of that. And it's so common. I know in my past and, with my parents and my father, like it's just automatic, right?
Hmm.
Either divert, pivot to something else, or shrug it off, like,
Yeah.
oh no, like, or self-deprecate. And right, that does so much to the other person because you're not taking that in. So I really want to take that in, what you said, and I really appreciate you saying that.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. As I think about that in baseball terms, it's stepping back into the batter's box, right? And I think when you kind of blow it off, like, I love that you brought that up. I mean, I think when somebody gives you a compliment and you just say, it's nothing, well, you actually diminish the power that in what they tried to give you, right? It's a
Yeah.
gift. And it's
Yeah.
so I think part of that is stepping back into the batter box and say, let's go to the next level. Let's take the relationship to the next, to new heights. And I think that's part of what that is. And what I have actually found, and I think I won't call it wisdom. I think it is age, and I think life experience being. And I come at this just so you know. I'm very introverted and shy, so this is not my natural thing at all. And uh, in fact, I told Brian just on Monday when I talked to him, we have a kind of a standing call every couple of weeks. It was like, I would love to be as gifted an interviewer as you, because you seem to really bring out the nuances in people. But I think at the end of the day, what I love about the ability to connect with another human being is the stories behind that, right? The relationships, the inner workings, the components. And so that's what keeps me showing up instead of going back into my shell, because with questions, and I think these little nuggets and observations you make, whether it be, in a story or the history or the retelling of somebody's, rise to success. I think there's so much value, but more importantly, from an interviewer's perspective, it's like I get a front row seat to the genius, right? So I'm kind of just off on a tangent there, but really at the end of the day, I think you do a really good job of that. But it's also really valuable to me because I'm learning continually in the process myself.
Oh, thank you.
So let me ask you a question. So why baseball?
So baseball for me has always been, well, not always. So when I was a kid, I loved baseball. I loved Wade Boggs, the Red Sox, and I grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where we got the Yankee games. So I watched the Yankees, and then I had that inner conflict going on, which I don't see in my current state as so much of an inner conflict. But when I talk to some people, they get revved up, right?
Yeah,
Yankees, Red Sox, how could you?
yeah.
Um, but collecting baseball cards with my friends and posters on the walls, and these were my idols, and so baseball was important, and it was a connective thread with my father. one of my memories, and I told him recently, is just going to baseball card shows. Just baseball cards, and we went to the show, and Ted Williams was there, and Mickey Mantle was there, and you know, really cool experiences. And my dad, he didn't necessarily like baseball cards, and like there's the friction point of remembering when I would talk about I got this baseball card and it's worth $35, and he would say, "Oh, worth to who? Who's going to buy that?" It's like, oh, well, I
I
don't
can relate.
know.
I can
Yeah.
relate to that. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but then at the same time, he's taking me to these baseball card shows, and I know it's not the thing that he would like to do. So that does resonate with me emotionally, and as I'm just talking to you, feelings are coming up. So it feels very complicated. But I stopped playing little league um, for a variety of reasons, including just my father and coaching and what was going on there.
Yeah.
And then I went to the Peace Corps in 2001. It's a really long time ago now. And after my time there, I have moved away from sports altogether. And then the last few years, I've just been getting back into reading. And
Yep.
something hit me at some point, probably 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, where I just wanted to read baseball fiction. And I started to read all these baseball novels that I could find. And then I would do that every summer. I would read 5, 6, 10 novels. And I did that until, again, I'm a writer. I write short stories, I write novels, and started and stopped several novels about baseball. And then, this story just really um, came out. And for me, when I hear writers and novelists, people say that, and they do this in the movies. They're like, oh, yeah, I just had this idea and knocked it out in 2 or 3 days. And it's
Yeah.
so frustrating. Like, that's not how it works, you know? Uh, and it wasn't how it worked. But, over the course of a summer, I wrote this book, and it was easier than anything else I'd ever written. And so baseball has always been there. I think when I've come back and all this work that I've been doing internally with therapy, I met my wife, who's a therapist, and little by little, because I didn't know anything
Sure.
about therapy, about like keeping my feelings stuck inside, but that's what I did my whole life.
Yeah.
And little by little, I started going to therapy, and it was just, I mean, what just happened a few minutes ago where I was talking about my dad, and I feel
Yeah.
these feelings coming up, and
Yeah.
that wouldn't have happened 10, 15 years ago. And so it's this amazing feeling. Like, oh, I'm a human. I can connect with my feelings and
Yeah.
emotions. And
And
so,
you don't have to be ashamed about it. I mean,
yeah,
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 that's so huge.
I think that segues into Field of Dreams. And
Yeah.
so, that's what I mean, to go back to your original question, why baseball? That's why baseball, for me, it has a lot of meaning in all these different ways. And then it is interesting, the fiction part of it, because you know it's come up in the podcast. WP Kinsella says, baseball fiction is such a huge thing because of, at least according to him, the foul lines diverge into infinity. Um, the outfield, the fences have so many possibilities. There's so much room for experimentation in baseball, where almost every other sport is just like, this is how it is. These are the fixed lines, and you don't see fiction in any other sport. Is that just a coincidence? I don't think so, right? There's
No.
no strong football fiction, basketball fiction, tennis fiction, golf, where I would see more irregularities. Maybe more in that area. There have been more movies with golf. I don't know. But, baseball, there's so much possibility. And I think that's why also I was drawn to baseball fiction, but also there's so much depth. It feels like you can just keep going into these different stories, and it's so interesting, and get to the emotion.
The thing about the game, I think, and I never got the opportunity to play as a kid. I did like coach pitch. I think one year soccer was kind of my game, but I always had a fascination with the game. I grew up in Albuquerque, so we had we were one of the first families on the block to get cable, and WGN was like one of the channels we got. So I for a long time I thought the Cubs were the only team there was to root for, right? So I became a Cubs fan by default, and then eventually we got TBS or WTBS at the time, and it was the Braves. But really, the Cubs were always my thing. And um, I always kind of like to joke because I ended up going into coaching for soccer. I was a coach for 18 years. I always seemed to get teams that were, had a lot of potential, but players that were the misfits, right? And I'm really good at picking the teams that don't win, and that kind of sort of professional, at losing in certain respects. But I always like the the promise of the Cubs. I would have conversations when I was a kid, like why would you like that team? And it's like because there's a mystery to it, right? There's a to me there's a passion behind the team itself. There's a mystique, and of course, they wouldn't win a World Series for many, many, many years, until 2017, which was one of the happiest days of my life. But there were so many lessons in the game, I thought, and was always super fascinated to bring it all the way to the Field of Dreams. Like the one of my best experiences was, or what I had always hoped would be my best experience, is having a catch with my dad, right? And he just didn't like doing it, didn't like going out there and tossing the ball. And so when the movie came out, and of course I didn't know about the book, I wish I had, because I would have been a voracious reader of it in high school. But I thought, here's this movie that has this really strong emotional undercurrent, and there's just some complexity to the story and the just how it works out. And I thought, okay, my dad will see this, right, and this will be this will tip it for me, and this will, hey, do you want to go have a catch? And I remember, I think the movie came out in '88, if I'm not mistaken, and I was a junior in high school, and sort of half jokingly said, "Hey, let's go throw the ball." Yeah, nah.
Hmm.
And I just remember how that hurt, and how it affected me. But then watching that movie, and at the very end, how he gets to have a catch with his dad, and how I think there are a lot of people that have or struggled with relationships with their parents that, would like that one moment of do-over, right? Where you could have it and, be able to do it. So I said in the intro, when that movie's on, every time it's on, I have to watch it to the end because I'm just emotionally stuck, and I have to see it through. There are very few that do that. Rudy's another one, but
Yeah, yeah,
Field of Dreams is there. I mean, it's that for me,
yeah,
and there's always that little sense of regret because we just didn't have that. We didn't have that connection, even though I would have loved to have had that with my dad.
yeah, yeah. And it you can't even help it, right? It gets
Yeah,
in, it penetrates all these layers, all these walls that come up. And like you said, for many people, there is that moment. It's not necessarily a catch. For many, it is, but I think it strikes through there as well. It's like if people are watching that, like whatever their catch is to them, like it hits on that. So it's such a great uh, go to. It's like, oh, I'm feeling locked up right now. I'm feeling detached. Like, let me just watch this movie, and it's going to open me up in some way.
it will, because I think there's so many lessons in this story, right? Keep going. Listen to this inner voice that you've got that's telling you what to do next, and if you follow your intuition, that you generally the outcome, the result will, it'll usually be better than you can possibly imagine. I one of the I think the strangest components that I pulled, or not components, but really strangest points from the movie that really stuck with me, is Ray going to the game with Terrence Mann, right? And I didn't know until I listened to your podcast, right? That was actually supposed to be J.D. Salinger, right? It was inspired by him, and for legal reasons they couldn't use his name in the movie, right? But I remember thinking to myself, this is a guy still looking for that father figure, still looking for that person to, to have this experience. So they go to the game, and I thought, man, you drove all this way to go to the game, and then yet, he wants to leave, right? Because I think he just like, oh, I'm not supposed to be here. It's not supposed to happen. And I so wanted Terrence Mann, to actually say no. You got to stay to the end. You got to watch the whole game, because that's what that's why we came. And I
Uh-huh.
don't know why that piece of the movie actually struck me so, but it just felt like there was unfinished business. Obviously, they go on to tell the story and almost running into Moonlight Graham, the whole nine yards. I mean, the way that they weaved it in was really really good, but I think there's just such an emotional complexity to that movie when you start like peeling the onions back, the layers of the onion back, that um, you could do a complete psychological write up on that movie in such a way.
Yeah, right, right. I mean, and the author, and that's partly what I'm trying to do there, because
Yeah,
it's so interesting to come up with these pieces. And what you're talking about too, that scene at Fenway, it's so different from the book, because in the book, Ray, he's with Salinger. Salinger doesn't want to be there, and then Ray goes to get hot dogs, and then he's coming back. He hits his head on one of the beams and gets knocked out. And it's very strange and very different from what we see, but it has um, this meaning in other ways. But I mean, from what you're saying, you would have liked there been to have been more of a bonding between the two at the
yeah,
game. Is that what you're saying?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of thought that was what it was setting up, and then eventually they do get there, right? There is this genuine friendship that occurs, and I think that I like that, because I think it also shows that even though I don't know. Not, I mean, not that we're going to get into the the psychological breakdown of the movie, but I think at the end of the day, the fact that they could connect at that level, and there was a mutual admiration by the end of the movie, and then there's a little bit of sadness you see in Ray when he goes off into the field, right? Like he gets to go, but he doesn't, and there was a purpose and a reason, and so I honestly did not know about the book until the podcast, and so it's on my list to read next, because I really want to read that story, because I know there's a lot of things, exactly like you said, with the hot dogs and getting knocked out, that are different from the movie. And a lot of cases, they make a movie to sell to what the viewing audience looks for, but oftentimes the book's much better than the movie, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's why in this case I think it's so interesting. And this was the last episode that I released about Phil Alden Robinson and what he was able to do. And like this, he couldn't have gotten to where he was able to get to unless he was rejected and turned down for years, because he
Yeah.
just kept telling the story to people. And if they would have been on board from the beginning, it might have been very similar to the book. And in the book, it doesn't end with the father and son. It's not that story, and it's amazing, because that's huge, and it has such an emotional impact. And um, Phil, when I talk to him, underplays that a little bit. It's like, oh, I only changed this part. Like it's an enormous it's an enormous change, you know.
Yeah, it's I have not listened to that episode, but I'm going to. I know you just released it, and I can't wait to dig in. I've been going back through season one, and just picking up some things that I didn't pick up the first time around. One of the episodes that you cover is how there's this unusual. I mean, this is not related to Field of Dreams for my audience, but how there's a term, and I meant to write it down, and forgot to go back and get it. But the term where uh, these individuals make up that they played in professional baseball, right? Minor leagues or professional, and you talk about I think a chiropractor that has the World Series ring and says he played for the Yankees. And I mean, this is pre-internet, so a lot of those things were probably easier to sell than they would be obviously today. But what made you think about that topic and how to bring that out? Because it really got me thinking about a couple of really braggadocious people that I think they do that because they feel like they have to. Like nobody else will see them in the world unless they have this big significant thing, and they think nobody in the world would go look it up in an encyclopedia to prove it, to not be true.
Yeah. Well, it is linked to Field of Dreams because it's Eddie Sissons syndrome. That's what
That's right. Yeah.
right? And Eddie Sissons was a character and a significant character in Shoeless Joe in the novel that inspired Field of Dreams. But and Phil, I'm talking to Phil. He regrets not being able to include it because he really enjoyed that. But you make a movie, it can only be so long. You have to make
Yeah.
certain cuts. But like going down that rabbit hole, it was just so interesting, and it is off the path. But when I found out, wow, there's like these guys actually wrote this academic paper on this fictional character, right? W.P. Kinsella creates this character, and then it turns into this real thing. And not only does it turn into a real thing, but based on the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, 1 in 5 men who claim to have played in professional baseball are lying. I mean, that's
Yep.
incredible.
It is incredible.
Right? And like what you're talking about, the psychological part, I asked the guys who came up with this paper, and they didn't know a lot or go into that area, but I do think what you said is true, and I think a lot of the reasons you might think up are true for why people do that. You want attention. You haven't gotten attention. We all want attention, and we often downplay that, but then it leaks out, right? That's, as a therapist, you see all these people suffering because they have feelings, they want attention, they want to belong, and they push that down, and then it leaks out in all these harmful ways. So I think for a lot of men, in this specific case, and of course it's women too, but in this case, you want to be seen. Like, you want to do great things, and you start to tell this, and it might start small, and then it just snowballs, and all of a sudden, you played for the Yankees and you hit what does the guy say, 16 unassisted triple plays, right?
Yeah.
And it just gets out of hand, and if nobody's calling you on it or can prove it, then that's the
Just gets
world you
concluded.
inhabit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found that super interesting, and I too would like to, have seen them, go into that, that form of the story, but that also took me down the rabbit hole of, how often does that happen, and what's the main motivation and the reason to do it, and specifically around a sport, whether it be baseball or any other, and I think it really comes down to this sense of wanting to be seen and belong. And in the case, I think the example that you give with the chiropractor, right? It's good for business, right?
Yeah.
People wanted to hear, a handful of stories while he's, adjusting or, doing whatever he was doing. He might have, I think he was a chiropractor, might have been a dentist or something, but
No, you're
whatever it
right.
was, right? There was a business motivation there, but at the end of the day, you also, know that's just a deeply troubled individual because they didn't get something else out of life, which is kind of sad. And I think about, and this is just the way your crazy brain works, but it's like, it goes back to the game, right? You only get so many at bats, you only get so many opportunities, and not everybody gets to be a star, and everybody would have liked to have been, the Babe Ruths of whatever their profession or their opportunities are. But we put these athletes, whether, it's, you think that person played 25 years ago or you play now, and you put these people up on pedestals, and that's how we gear and sort of align with what we think is success versus what we do every single day. And I find that part fascinating about how we have how the game at every level, right? Every professional sport has really evolved now, and where we put these people up on a pedestal and kind of worship them because of what they do. And it's like it's okay as a fan to do it to a certain degree, but it's also kind of sad because we feel like the rest of us could never measure up.
Yeah. I mean, that when you're saying that, it brings up this, like, sometimes when I'm watching a sport or if I'm watching it with somebody There's a commentator, and it's like, oh, that's an amazing throw or an amazing catch. It's like, that's what they do
Every
all
day.
day, every day, right? And it's like, there are accountants out there who are like so good at what they do,
Yeah.
right? But
Made
it's just
that tax statement
yeah,
work exactly the way it
yeah,
was supposed to.
yeah. And there are people in all these areas who are practicing, putting in those 10,000 hours, and they are experts at what they do, but it doesn't have the same appeal, so they're not seen in that same way. And like you're saying, they may not then see themselves as having that same value because of how other people are seen and hyped up. So that is sad.
I don't know. It's, kind of goes back to sort of the premise of the story, right? Which is, if, you know, Ray just wanted to reconnect with his dad in the movie, and they had a falling out. Obviously, he tells the story of, his late teenage years and, screw you, I'm out of the house or whatever kind of thing. And I think a lot of people could relate to that, and never having that opportunity to try and right that wrong, so to speak. And you take everything that person was about, and that in his case, baseball was his dad's thing, and he started to resent it because of that, right? And I might be reading a little bit between the lines, but you could kind of feel like, well, he used, that was their thing in common, but then he used it as a weapon later, right? And that how that had to hurt his dad. He knew that probably had to hurt his dad. And you think back to kind of just what we've been talking about. I was just thinking about how, if you can't get that love and recognition from the person that's most important to you, that's how a lot of these folks went out into the world to seek it from the, strangers, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's everything what
Yep.
you're saying, right? That's the root of most of our problems, right? We don't get that unconditional love. We don't get that support. We don't get that modeling from people of what it's okay to be like or feel like, and then we unconsciously seek that out from other people. But then we're playing out all these defenses that we used
Yeah,
so that we can
absolutely.
maintain these broken attachments.
Yeah, great point. What has going through especially season two with all these interviews and getting sort of, excuse the pun, but it's a good one, I think, insider baseball as to how the story evolved and how it became the movie and all the parts that had to come into play. What have you learned throughout that process that's really impacted you?
For me, part of this process is really being able to sit with not only this emotional connection, but these good things that are happening. And I talked before about shrugging things off, like the compliments, but I've shrugged off other things too when good things have happened in my life. And it's such a loss because you can never get that back. It's like when not only something bad happens, you want to face that, but when something good happens or something great happens, and you're detached, and I was detached, and then I just miss it. And then it's moving on to the next thing. Okay, what else do I have to do to prove myself? And now I cannot even appreciate what's happened.
Yeah.
So in this process, um, and part of this is talking to all these people who are connected to Field of Dreams and their generosity and kindness. I mean, it's been amazing.
Yeah.
Talking to all these different people, and every single one of them have been so nice and excited still to talk about this movie from 35 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, Willie Steele, the W.P. Kinsella biographer, like he was one of the first people I talked to. Was great. Lawrence Kesnick, the editor, who prompted Kinsella, was fantastic. I mean, everybody I talked to. Phil Alden Robinson, the director of Field of Dreams, just so nice. And and I was able to um, talk with recently Timothy Busfield, who
Oh,
was,
wow.
he was Mark,
Yeah.
the
Yeah. The brother-in-law.
brother-in-law, but
Yep.
he's part of my favorite show, The West Wing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Danny Kincannon, and so so great to talk to him. Dwyer Brown was maybe the first person I talked to who plays the father in Field of Dreams, and his book is So good. Dwyer Brown's book, If You Build It, a book about Father's Fate and Field of Dreams.
Oh,
It's able to capture some of that, some of the magic from the movie. But I cried several times when I was reading it. And one of the moments that stands out, which I haven't gotten to yet in the podcast, but he talks about Dwyer Brown when the movie came out a few months after it came out. The producers and maybe Phil Alden Robinson called him and said, "Hey, have you gone to watch the movie?" And he's like, "Yeah, I've gone to see it." They're like, "No, have you gone in the last 15 minutes and stood in the back of the theater?" He's like, "No, why would I do that?" They're like, just do it, just go." And so, he finds a night where he goes and he stands in the back of the theater, and he stands there and looks around while, all these people, but especially men, in those last few minutes of the film, like their heads drop into their hands, right? And they're
yeah.
racking, their bodies are racking, and they're trying to hide it, but they're
Oh
sobbing.
my.
And it keeps going until the lights come up, and there's still all these people, again, especially men, sitting in their seats crying. And it's this amazing emotional experience that,
Yep.
I mean, even in retelling it, I feel it, and in reading that, it's amazingly impacting. So, um,
Wow.
it just highlights some of these special moments and on what this movie did for people, but gave to people. And for me, it's amazing to connect with this. And I feel like at this point, I feel like I talk about that in the first episode of the second season, like this voice, this calling, and it's really cool.
Yeah.
It's like I want to do this. I want to complete this, and sometimes it's daunting to put this all together. But I like, to your ripple effect. Like I want people to hear this and experience this and really be able to go back to that connection again. Like
Yeah.
to be alive, because that's what it is when you connect with your feelings. And so much of the time, we're pushing that down. We're
Yeah.
on autopilot, and we're not actually connecting with our feelings, and we're not being fully alive.
Well, I mean, you just made me think of something. The first time I saw the movie, I even remember the theater I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I had never experienced a movie where it was just this eerie silence at the end. I saw people, they were clearly emotional. I saw, a lot of men who you would never have expected to have a tear in their eye, let alone tears streaming down their cheeks. And I remember that, I think I was like third row from the back, and we had to, everybody had to kind of file out towards the top of the theater. Like, so they go by, a little bit different than our stadium seating today. Right. But, um, I remember at the time I was with my friend and he could not talk. He didn't want to talk. He didn't, and I'm like, I just had this thing in my stomach, and I remember just like sitting there, and then I mean, I don't think anybody left until the credits were done and the house lights came up, and it was the most odd experience. I never had experienced anything like that till I went to Schindler's List.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking at the end of Schindler's List how much that felt similar, right? Because the emotional thread that ties that in to anybody who I think could relate, whether it's trying to connect with a parent or a sibling or someone important to you in your life, and you have this thing that came out of nowhere that sort of kind of hits you right in the face and says, "Hey, you got to remember." And that's where you get like, I think that emotional attachment, it just, I remember it blowing me away even as a teenager. Like, I can't believe that just happened. Right. And
Hmm.
so when you said that, I mean, I mean, the last 15 minutes, have you gone and seen and stood in the back of the theater in the last 15 minutes? I'm like, oh, yeah. I mean, to show what you've done, what you've built in terms of an emotional connection to the audience. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. And some people might take it for granted, like it's a moment, but for so many people, there's no emotional connection. Like
Yeah.
I had no, again, 10, 15 years ago, I had no emotional intelligence and could not discern what's happening, differentiate feelings. Like, how do I not know what a feeling
Yeah.
is? But we just don't speak in that language. And,
Right.
of all the mandatory courses in school, this is not one of them,
That's right.
of what people and kids should learn. And it's so important. And,
Let me ask you this question. So the season's still unfolding, right? So
Mhm.
what's the one big thing that you hope comes from this season? Is it, landing an interview with like Kevin Costner? Is it getting, this thing to just take off like a rocket because of the popularity of the show? What's your BHAG, your big hairy audacious goal for season two?
I never heard BHAG. Is that, are you patenting that?
No, unfortunately, I wish I could, but yeah, no. Feel free to use it though.
Um, it, it's funny. I said this to Tim Busfield. It's like, people ask, like, do you want Kevin Costner? No offense to Kevin Costner, I
Yeah,
love Kevin Costner, but I really wanted to talk to Timothy Busfield, and so I did, and it was great. Um, if that happens, if I end up talking to Kevin Costner, that's fantastic. But like, for me, bringing people together, and there's people, I mean, almost like that end of the movie experience. It's like, that's a fantasy that I have, of people coming together in remembrance, but in connecting.
yeah,
I think it's episode 3 where I compare the book and the film. And one thing that Shoeless Joe had was, at the end, when Salinger is giving the speech, he mentions people in their contrived urgencies, right? That they're stuck in this contrived urgency. That everything's just chugging along, and they're not able to stop. So
yeah.
that's what I hope for, is that people listen, and for a moment they're able to stop and say, wait, what is important to me? Oh, I can really connect with my emotions, and um, really take a moment to pause and really find that out. Like, what matters to me, what is important, is connection, connecting with people, and um, you know, the more the better. But
Sure.
I also think there's this message that you can't spread enough, and you don't see it a lot in films and television shows. I talked with Lawrence Kessnig, and he was talking about Ted Lasso,
Yeah,
right? It's this,
exactly. Yep.
right? It's this show that has all this connection and all these good things, and there's not the villain necessarily. Um, there aren't these horrible things that happen, and it's people love it.
And
And
there's
why
good
can't we?
good lessons that you can take and apply it, right? And you
Yeah,
can put that into practice with your own life right now.
yeah. And why can't we have more of that? Why does it always have to be conflict and terrible things? And um, there was a Field of Dreams uh, television show that was planned, and it got
Oh,
canceled. and
wow.
and it's like, maybe more people can turn to positive projects. And I mean, it's not just positive, it's just showing all sides of humanity, and it's so much of it is skewed toward violence. And why does that have to be the case? So I think, that's also part of this wish that, the buzz starts just with my book as well. Like, the conversations continue, and people connect, and we're able to have more of these opportunities to slow down and connect, whatever it may be.
I think what the season does, I'm sure, whenever you get to the end and you say this is it, I feel like I can put the whole thing to bed. I think what you'll find is that you've made a huge impact on the people that have listened to it, because you are helping them get to something that we're not normally comfortable doing, which is to look inward and say, where are we? Right. And maybe you can't right all the wrongs in your life. And there's no magic formula to it, but you can understand it a little bit more, and you can see how it's framing where and what you do today. And maybe, just maybe, what you've built, and when they come, you'll help them figure out how to do it differently going forward. And I think that is definitely the lessons that I'm picking up so far. And I think that's an absolute gift, in a way that even probably the book and the movie itself was not really intended to do, but you're bringing that out and helping people really figure out how to make that connection, to slow down, take stock, and say, okay, how can I do things differently? And so I think you are you've hit on something that I think the world does need, and it's, talk about the ultimate ripple. I'm just super super impressed with it.
I'm just taking that in right now. So it's great to hear you say that, and like all these things and what you're getting out of it and seeing in this podcast. And it really means a lot to me to hear. Like, yeah, this is what I'm trying for. And here you're saying, this is what I'm taking. This is what I'm seeing. So, yeah, I appreciate you saying that.
Sure. Well, I appreciate you doing the work. I want to be respectful of your time because I know you are a busy guy. I would just like to throw out a couple of ripple questions just to give my audience just a little sense of who you are beyond just the work and the podcast. But what did the 7-year-old Ben want to be when he grew up?
7-year-old Ben. God, I feel so lost. Like I would say baseball player.
Yeah.
But man, I don't even know. Like I think I still have walls to knock down to get
Yeah.
back to those memories. But yeah, I would say baseball player. Yeah, that's all I got.
What's the best thing a friend, a family member, or a professional colleague you could hear them say about you?
My wife just saying that you're a good person and you're really trying, and I really see you for all that you're doing, and I love you so much, and that means so much to me, and I really want to internalize that.
That's one of the best answers I've gotten. I love that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What do you consider your superpower?
I would say what I'm working on for my superpower is to be able to recognize all that I'm doing and all that I have to offer and all my skills without some kind of negative criticizing voice getting in. And I feel like I've been building that, and I'm still working on that. But that's really important. Like, so for me, that's the biggest superpower for me to be happy.
That's a good one. I love that. I love that. What was your favorite baseball card that you collected when you were a kid, or even as an adult?
Sure, Wade Boggs, rookie, 1983. When I got that, that definitely stands out. Then Ken Griffey Jr. rookie, probably.
Yeah.
Right, a million people say that the upper deck, like that's when baseball cards really changed. But
Yeah.
they were all worthless for years before that. So it's like money wise, not sentimental, not what it meant in other ways. But yeah, the market had busted. So yeah.
Do you still have them?
I do. Yeah. And my parents are like, when are you going to come and get these baseball cards out of here? It's like, you can burn them. Like a lot of them. I took the cards that are meaningful to me, but there are boxes and boxes of baseball cards that they don't have a lot of value. They meant a lot in the process of doing it, but I still have the cards. I don't know what I'll do with those, if anything.
Well, before you burn them, I'll give you my address. You can send them to me. I mean, to have even the cards from famous Ben Orlando, I would be like, oh, that's badass. That's really cool. All right, my last two questions, and I'll let you go. When you hear the term the ripple effect, what does that conjure up for you? What does it mean to you?
It's definitely, in the context of this conversation and Field of Dreams, it means connection. It means, and especially in a story, like you hear a good story, the first thing you want to do is tell that to somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? And that ripple effect. And it's also in the emotion that comes up when you hear the story. You want someone else to feel that emotion. So to me, that's the ripple effect. And, that's what I hear you're trying to do. And that's what I'm trying to do with all these creative works that I'm doing.
Well, you are definitely doing that, I will tell you, and you are an inspiration to me. I'm so grateful to know you, and so hopefully we can stay in contact and work on becoming friends, because I would love to. It would be an honor, I promise. What ripple can I create for you?
What ripple can you create for me?
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds like you said you've been telling people about the podcast and, just spreading the word. Like I'm trying to find ways, and like, I feel like podcasts specifically, and I know this listening to podcasts, that even if I like a podcast, I may not, um, you know, tell the person or reach out. And I know that's
yeah.
happening a lot. So it's hard. I think there could be a lot of people listening that like it, but aren't necessarily spreading it. So, in terms of, I'm trying to find ways to put myself out there. But yeah, anything you can do, I appreciate.
Well, I would. It would be my honor. I actually was going to wait till I met you, but one of the collegiate all-time winning managers is become a good friend of mine. I interviewed him on my podcast last year, and I know he is going to love your podcast. And he's got ties to like professionals for 30 years. I think he could help get some visibility for it. He's just such an all-around good guy. Ray Birmingham. He's the former manager of the University of New Mexico Lobos, which is where I went to school. But he's just a salt of the earth guy. So I'm gonna get this in front of him so that he knows to put it out there. Hopefully, we can get you some additional audience, especially amongst the baseball community. But I'd be happy to promote it any way I can. One suggestion I'll throw out there to you is opening up a way in your website where people. I love how you come back, especially in season 2, where you've got these little snippets of interviews from people about what baseball kind of meant to them. Or I know that, maybe not phrasing it the way you do it exactly, but I mean that's what I take from it, is like how it made an impact. Doing that where people, after they read your or listen to your episode, could come to your site and actually submit those. I think you'd collect a bajillion stories about
Oh,
even, maybe, maybe there's, even more to tell in terms of what this means to them. But I think that'd be a great way for people to actually raise their hand and say, "Hey, Ben, great job. This is what I took from the episode."
yeah, that's a really good suggestion, and I can add that in the episode, because I do
Yeah.
get emails, and like I get emails, and I'm planning to put those on the website about, because there are a lot more stories of what baseball means to people. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Ah, awesome. Well,
Well,
Ben, thank you so much for the time today. I really, really appreciate it. I, I could talk to you for hours, and I mean, I didn't get to like half the questions I want to ask you, so we may have to do like a
okay,
sequel to
yeah.
this. But thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day and ripple on.
Thank you, Steve.